Angry misogynist screams at old woman, then learns her grandson owns the building. It was a chilly afternoon in the bustling city, the kind of day where the streets were filled with hurried footsteps and murmurs of conversation. On the corner of the block, outside a grand old apartment building that had stood there for decades, an elderly woman named Eleanor sat quietly on a bench. She wore a faded pink sweater and carried a small bag of breadcrumbs, which she scattered occasionally for the sparrows that flocked around her feet. The building had been Eleanor's home for over 40 years. She had seen the neighborhood transform, watching new businesses move in, new faces fill the apartments, and modern conveniences replace the charm of the past. Despite the changes, Eleanor remained a constant, kind, gentle, and respected by those who knew her. But not everyone in the neighborhood appreciated her presence. "Hey, move it!" A sharp, hostile voice cut through the air, startling Eleanor and scattering the sparrows. She turned to see a man stomping toward her, his face red with irritation. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing an ill-fitting suit and a scowl that seemed permanently etched into his face. His name was Doug, a brash and self-important businessman who had recently leased one of the storefronts on the ground floor of the building. Eleanor blinked, her confusion evident. "Excuse me," she asked politely, her voice steady despite the man's aggressive tone. "You're in the way," Doug snapped, gesturing toward the bench. "I'm trying to unload some equipment from my shop, and you're sitting here like you own the place. Do you have any idea how much I pay in rent? Move." Eleanor's eyes narrowed slightly, but she remained calm. "This is a public bench," she said softly. "And I'm not blocking the sidewalk." Doug threw up his hands in exasperation. "Oh, great, another entitled old lady who thinks the world revolves around her. Listen, I don't have time for this. Get up and go feed your birds somewhere else." The venom in his words drew the attention of several passers-by, who paused to watch the confrontation. Eleanor looked around, noticing the small crowd that had gathered, but she didn't waver. "I've been sitting here every afternoon for years," she said. "I'm not causing any trouble. Perhaps you should take a moment to calm down." Doug laughed bitterly, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Calm down? Calm down? Lady, you're sitting on my time. I've got a business to run, and I don't need some." He paused, his sneer deepening. "Some old bird lady getting in my way." The onlookers murmured among themselves, disapproving of Doug's behavior. A younger woman stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Hey, you don't have to talk to her like that," she said. "She's not doing anything wrong." Doug whirled around to face the woman. "Mind your own business," he barked. "This is between me and her." Eleanor raised a hand to the younger woman, a silent gesture of gratitude and reassurance. "It's all right," she said. "Some people just need to vent their frustrations." Doug's face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, don't try to act all wise and serene. You're just another busybody who thinks the world owes you something." Eleanor sighed, standing slowly from the bench. She was frail but carried herself with quiet dignity, her years of life experience evident in the way she held her head high. "You seem very upset," she said gently. "I hope whatever's troubling you gets resolved soon." Doug rolled his eyes. "Spare me the lecture, Grandma. Just stay out of my way." With that, he stormed off toward the storefront, where a truck was parked haphazardly on the curb. Eleanor watched him go, her expression a mix of sadness and pity. Later that evening, Doug was in his shop, barking orders at his employees as they set up displays for the grand opening. He prided himself on being a tough boss, believing that fear and intimidation were the keys to productivity. But as he stood by the counter, reviewing his plans, a tall, sharply dressed man in his 30s walked through the door. The man exuded confidence, his tailored suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to Doug's disheveled appearance. His name was Peter, and he was the building's owner, a fact Doug had yet to learn. "Doug, I presume?" Peter said, his tone polite but firm. Doug looked up, momentarily taken aback by the man's commanding presence. "Yeah, that's me," he replied. "You here to buy something?" Peter ignored the question, his sharp gaze fixed on Doug. "I understand there was an incident earlier today," he said. "An elderly woman was verbally harassed outside this building. Witnesses described the man responsible as tall, aggressive, and wearing a suit." Doug's face paled slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. Yeah, I told some lady to move off the bench. She was in the way. What's it to you? Peter's expression hardened. That lady happens to be my grandmother. Doug froze, the color draining from his face. What? Peter stepped closer, his voice low and measured. Eleanor Reynolds. She's lived in this building longer than most of us have been alive. She's kind, patient, and respected by everyone who knows her. And you had the audacity to scream at her? Doug stammered, his bravado crumbling. I didn't know. I mean, she was just sitting there. Just sitting there? Peter interrupted, his tone sharp. That bench is as much hers as this building is mine. You, on the other hand, are a tenant who seems to think he can treat people however he pleases. Doug's employees stopped what they were doing, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. Peter glanced around the shop, his gaze taking in the unfinished displays and scattered boxes. I had high hopes for this space, Peter said. I thought it might bring something positive to the neighborhood. But after hearing about your behavior, I'm starting to think I made a mistake. Doug's heart raced. Look, I didn't mean anything by it, he said quickly. I was just having a bad day. I'll apologize to her, I swear. Peter crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. You'll do more than apologize, he said. You'll show her the respect she deserves, starting now. And if I hear so much as a whisper of disrespect from you again, you'll find yourself out of this building faster than you can pack a box. Doug nodded hastily, his bravado shattered. I understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Peter turned to leave but paused at the door. You'd do well to remember, he said over his shoulder, this building doesn't just house businesses. It houses a community. Act like you're part of it. As Peter walked out, Doug slumped against the counter, his mind racing. He had learned a hard lesson that day, one he wouldn't soon forget. The following morning, Doug stood outside the apartment building, shifting nervously as he clutched a bouquet of fresh flowers. The vibrant colors of the blooms contrasted sharply with his pale, uneasy expression. Passers-by glanced at him curiously, some whispering to each other. Word of yesterday's incident had spread quickly. Doug felt the weight of their stares, but he knew he had no choice. Swallowing his pride, he took a deep breath and walked toward the bench where Eleanor was sitting, as she always did in the early afternoons. Eleanor looked up as Doug approached, her expression calm and unreadable. Good morning, she said gently. Hi, Doug mumbled, his usual arrogance replaced with awkward humility. He hesitated before extending the bouquet toward her. These are for you. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For, yesterday. Eleanor took the flowers, her fingers brushing against the petals as she examined them. Thank you, she said simply. That's very kind of you. Doug shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say next. I didn't realize. I didn't know you were important. Eleanor raised an eyebrow, a hint of amusement flickering in her eyes. And if I weren't? Would that make it acceptable to treat me the way you did? Doug opened his mouth to respond but stopped himself, the weight of her words sinking in. No, he said finally. It wouldn't? Eleanor nodded, her gaze softening. We all have bad days, Mr. Doug. But how we choose to handle them defines who we are. I hope you'll remember that. Doug nodded quickly. I will. I promise. As the days went by, Doug began to make an effort to change. It wasn't easy. He had spent years building a reputation as a hard-nosed, no-nonsense businessman. But Eleanor's quiet dignity and Peter's stern warning had left a mark on him, one he couldn't ignore. He started small, offering a polite good morning to the tenants he passed in the hallways. He held doors open, smiled at children playing on the sidewalk, and even started chatting with some of the older residents who frequented the bench near his shop. Slowly but surely, the icy wall he had built around himself began to thaw. One afternoon, Doug noticed Eleanor struggling to carry a bag of groceries up the building's front steps. Without thinking, he rushed over to help. Let me get that for you, he said, taking the bag from her hands. Eleanor smiled. Thank you, Doug. That's very thoughtful of you. He walked her to her apartment, setting the groceries on the kitchen counter. The space was small but cozy, filled with photos of family and knickknacks that told the story of a long, well-lived life. As Doug looked around, his gaze landed on a framed photograph of Peter as a young boy, sitting on Eleanor's lap. "Hey," Doug said with a small smile. "Your grandson was a cute kid." Eleanor chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "And now he's a kind and accomplished man. I'm very proud of him." Doug hesitated before speaking again. "I guess I owe him to... He didn't have to let me stay after everything." Eleanor turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Peter values people who are willing to learn and grow. He sees potential where others see flaws. Perhaps that's something you can carry forward." Doug nodded, her words settling over him like a blanket of calm. Over the following months, Doug's business began to flourish, not because of his usual aggressive tactics, but because of his newfound focus on community. He partnered with local vendors, supported neighborhood events, and even hosted free workshops in his shop for young entrepreneurs looking to start their own businesses. One evening, as Doug was locking up for the night, Peter stopped by. "I've been hearing good things about you," Peter said, leaning casually against the doorframe. Doug grinned sheepishly. "Guess I'm trying to make up for a bad first impression?" Peter smirked. "You've done more than that. Keep it up." The two men shook hands, a silent acknowledgement of the journey Doug had undertaken. Eleanor continued to sit on her bench every afternoon, her presence a comforting constant in the neighborhood. She had become something of a local legend, her wisdom sought out by everyone from children to shop owners to new tenants. Her gentle advice and warm demeanor brought people together, fostering a sense of community that had been missing for years. One day, as she scattered breadcrumbs for the sparrows, a young woman sat down beside her. "Mrs. Reynolds, can I ask you something?" the woman said nervously. "Of course, dear," Eleanor replied. "I've been struggling to find my place here," the woman admitted. "Everyone seems so busy, and I don't know how to connect." Eleanor smiled, her gaze never leaving the sparrows. "Start small," she said. "A kind word, a helping hand, a smile for someone who needs it. You'll find that connection often grows from the simplest of gestures." The woman nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you. I'll try that." As time went on, the building and its surrounding streets became a symbol of unity and kindness. Doug's transformation inspired others to reflect on their own behavior, and Eleanor's quiet wisdom served as a guiding light for the entire community. During the holiday season, the tenants organized a surprise for Eleanor, a plaque placed on her favorite bench, dedicating it to her contributions to the neighborhood. It read, "In honor of Eleanor Reynolds, whose kindness built a community." When she saw it, Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "You've all given me far too much credit," she said, her voice trembling. "Not at all," Peter replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've taught us how to be better, Eleanor. And that's something we'll never forget." Years later, when Eleanor passed peacefully in her sleep, the neighborhood came together to celebrate her life. Stories were shared, laughter echoed through the streets, and her favorite bench was adorned with flowers. Doug, now a respected figure in the community, stood by the bench with Peter, both men reflecting on how much Eleanor had changed their lives. "She saw something in me when I didn't even see it myself," Doug said quietly. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to that." Peter nodded, his gaze fixed on the plaque. "She'd be proud of you." And as the sun set over the city, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood Eleanor had helped shape, her spirit lived on. In every act of kindness, every moment of connection, and every life she had touched. Years after Eleanor's passing, her influence continued to ripple through the neighborhood. The once divided community had become a beacon of unity and collaboration. New businesses thrived, families moved in, and the area became known as a haven for kindness and compassion. Doug, now a seasoned business owner, had transformed his shop into more than just a place of commerce. It was a gathering spot for the community. He hosted monthly charity events, organized food drives, and even mentored young entrepreneurs. The formerly brash and arrogant man had become a symbol of redemption, proof that change was always possible. Every year on Eleanor's birthday, the community held a celebration in her honor. People would gather at her bench, sharing stories about her wisdom, kindness, and the way she had touched their lives. Doug was always among them, often recounting the moment that had changed everything for him. "She saw me at my worst," he'd say, his voice thick with emotion. "And instead of tearing me down, she gave me the chance to be better. I owe her everything." Inspired by the profound impact Eleanor had on their lives, Peter and Doug teamed up to establish the Eleanor Reynolds Foundation. The foundation's mission was to spread Eleanor's values of kindness, respect, and community building to other neighborhoods across the city, and eventually, the country. The foundation funded programs aimed at fostering connections among neighbors, providing support for elderly residents, and offering mentorship opportunities for young people. One of its most successful initiatives was the Eleanor Bench Project, which placed benches in parks and public spaces, each with a plaque encouraging people to take a moment to connect. Doug poured his energy into the foundation, dedicating his time to ensuring that Eleanor's legacy would live on. "If she could turn someone like me around," he often said, "there's no limit to what her message can do." Over time, Eleanor's story became a source of inspiration for generations. Children in the neighborhood grew up hearing tales of her gentle wisdom and quiet strength, often visiting her bench to reflect or seek guidance from their elders. One young girl, Emma, often sat on Eleanor's bench after school, dreaming of the future. When she was asked to write an essay about someone who inspired her, she chose Eleanor, even though they had never met. "Eleanor Reynolds taught us that kindness is stronger than anger," Emma wrote. "Her story reminds me that even small actions can make a big difference. When I grow up, I want to be like her, someone who helps people see the good in themselves." Emma's essay won a citywide contest, and her words were shared at the annual celebration of Eleanor's life. Her speech brought tears to the eyes of many in the audience, including Doug, who saw in Emma the same spark of potential Eleanor had seen in him. As the Eleanor Bench Project expanded, benches bearing Eleanor's name began to appear in cities and towns far beyond the neighborhood. Each bench carried a simple inscription: "Sit, reflect, connect." The project encouraged people to slow down, take a breath, and remember the value of community and compassion. One such bench found its way to a bustling plaza in another city, where a man named Carlos sat one evening after a long and stressful day. As he read the inscription, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. A stranger sitting nearby noticed his weary expression and struck up a conversation. That small act of connection led Carlos to join a local community group, which soon became a cornerstone of his life. "I don't know who Eleanor Reynolds was," Carlos later wrote in a letter to the foundation, "but her bench reminded me that I'm not alone. It gave me a moment of peace and a chance to start over." Years later, a documentary titled Eleanor's Bench was released, chronicling her life and the transformation she inspired in the neighborhood. The film featured interviews with Peter, Doug, and other residents whose lives had been touched by Eleanor's kindness. Doug's segment was particularly moving. Standing beside Eleanor's bench, he spoke candidly about the man he used to be and the impact Eleanor had on him. "She didn't yell at me or try to put me in my place," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "She just showed me a better way. I didn't realize it at the time, but she was giving me a second chance. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to it." The documentary received widespread acclaim, spreading Eleanor's story to a global audience. People from all walks of life were inspired by her example, taking her message to heart and applying it in their own communities. Decades after her passing, Eleanor's bench remained a cherished landmark, visited by people from near and far. It became a symbol of hope and renewal, a reminder that even the smallest gestures of kindness could ripple outward in unimaginable ways. One quiet evening, a young man named Liam sat on the bench, reading a book about Eleanor's life. As the sun set and the city lights flickered on, he looked up at the plaque and smiled. "She would have loved this," he thought to himself. A simple bench, bringing people together. And in that moment, Liam felt a connection, not just to Eleanor, but to all the lives she had touched. Because her legacy wasn't just about one neighborhood or one moment. It was about the enduring power of kindness and how it could transform the world, one life at a time. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Eleanor's spirit lingered in the air, carried forward by every kind word, every act of respect, and every connection made on her beloved bench. As the decades passed, Eleanor's story continued to grow in influence. Inspired by the Eleanor Bench Project and the success of the Eleanor Reynolds Foundation, the United Nations declared her birthday, November 12th, as the Global Day of Kindness. On this day, people from every corner of the world were encouraged to perform acts of kindness, no matter how small, in honor of Eleanor's legacy. Social media platforms were flooded with posts tagged #KindnessLikeEleanor, as people shared their stories of helping strangers, reconnecting with loved ones, or simply taking a moment to show gratitude. From bustling cities to remote villages, Eleanor's name became synonymous with the idea that kindness could unite humanity. One particularly moving post came from a small town in South America, where a young woman named Sophia shared how she and her neighbors came together to repair the home of an elderly couple who had been struggling to maintain it. "I didn't know who Eleanor Reynolds was until this week," Sophia wrote, "but her story reminded me that we're all part of the same community. Kindness isn't just an action, it's a way of life." In the heart of Eleanor's old neighborhood, a new monument was erected to honor her legacy. The monument, a towering sculpture of intertwined hands, symbolized the connections she had inspired among people from all walks of life. Surrounding the monument were plaques engraved with quotes from Eleanor and stories from those whose lives she had touched. "She saw me at my worst," he'd say, his voice thick with emotion. "And instead of tearing me down, she gave me the chance to be better. I owe her everything." Inspired by the profound impact Eleanor had on their lives, Peter and Doug teamed up to establish the Eleanor Reynolds Foundation. The foundation's mission was to spread Eleanor's values of kindness, respect, and community building to other neighborhoods across the city, and eventually, the country. The foundation funded programs aimed at fostering connections among neighbors, providing support for elderly residents, and offering mentorship opportunities for young people. One of its most successful initiatives was the Eleanor Bench Project, which placed benches in parks and public spaces, each with a plaque encouraging people to take a moment to connect. Doug poured his energy into the foundation, dedicating his time to ensuring that Eleanor's legacy would live on. "If she could turn someone like me around," he often said, "there's no limit to what her message can do." Over time, Eleanor's story became a source of inspiration for generations. Children in the neighborhood grew up hearing tales of her gentle wisdom and quiet strength, often visiting her bench to reflect or seek guidance from their elders. One young girl, Emma, often sat on Eleanor's bench after school, dreaming of the future. When she was asked to write an essay about someone who inspired her, she chose Eleanor, even though they had never met. "Eleanor Reynolds taught us that kindness is stronger than anger," Emma wrote. "Her story reminds me that even small actions can make a big difference. When I grow up, I want to be like her, someone who helps people see the good in themselves." Emma's essay won a citywide contest, and her words were shared at the annual celebration of Eleanor's life. Her speech brought tears to the eyes of many in the audience, including Doug, who saw in Emma the same spark of potential Eleanor had seen in him. As the Eleanor Bench Project expanded, benches bearing Eleanor's name began to appear in cities and towns far beyond the neighborhood. Each bench carried a simple inscription: "Sit, reflect, connect." The project encouraged people to slow down, take a breath, and remember the value of community and compassion. One such bench found its way to a bustling plaza in another city, where a man named Carlos sat one evening after a long and stressful day. As he read the inscription, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. A stranger sitting nearby noticed his weary expression and struck up a conversation. That small act of connection led Carlos to join a local community group, which soon became a cornerstone of his life. "I don't know who Eleanor Reynolds was," Carlos later wrote in a letter to the foundation, "but her bench reminded me that I'm not alone. It gave me a moment of peace and a chance to start over." Years later, a documentary titled Eleanor's Bench was released, chronicling her life and the transformation she inspired in the neighborhood. The film featured interviews with Peter, Doug, and other residents whose lives had been touched by Eleanor's kindness. Doug's segment was particularly moving. Standing beside Eleanor's bench, he spoke candidly about the man he used to be and the impact Eleanor had on him. "She didn't yell at me or try to put me in my place," he said, his voice steady but emotional. She just showed me a better way. I didn't realize it at the time, but she was giving me a second chance. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to live up to it." The documentary received widespread acclaim, spreading Eleanor's story to a global audience. People from all walks of life were inspired by her example, taking her message to heart and applying it in their own communities. Decades after her passing, Eleanor's bench remained a cherished landmark, visited by people from near and far. It became a symbol of hope and renewal, a reminder that even the smallest gestures of kindness could ripple outward in unimaginable ways. One quiet evening, a young man named Liam sat on the bench, reading a book about Eleanor's life. As the sun set and the city lights flickered on, he looked up at the plaque and smiled. She would have loved this, he thought to himself. A simple bench, bringing people together. And in that moment, Liam felt a connection, not just to Eleanor, but to all the lives she had touched. Because her legacy wasn't just about one neighborhood or one moment. It was about the enduring power of kindness and how it could transform the world, one life at a time. As the stars emerged in the night sky, Eleanor's spirit lingered in the air, carried forward by every kind word, every act of respect, and every connection made on her beloved bench. As the decades passed, Eleanor's story continued to grow in influence. Inspired by the Eleanor Bench Project and the success of the Eleanor Reynolds Foundation, the United Nations declared her birthday, November 12th, as the Global Day of Kindness. On this day, people from every corner of the world were encouraged to perform acts of kindness, no matter how small, in honor of Eleanor's legacy. Social media platforms were flooded with posts tagged #KindnessLikeEleanor, as people shared their stories of helping strangers, reconnecting with loved ones, or simply taking a moment to show gratitude. From bustling cities to remote villages, Eleanor's name became synonymous with the idea that kindness could unite humanity. One particularly moving post came from a small town in South America, where a young woman named Sophia shared how she and her neighbors came together to repair the home of an elderly couple who had been struggling to maintain it. "I didn't know who Eleanor Reynolds was until this week," Sophia wrote, "but her story reminded me that we're all part of the same community. Kindness isn't just an action, it's a way of life." In the heart of Eleanor's old neighborhood, a new monument was erected to honor her legacy. The monument, a towering sculpture of intertwined hands, symbolized the connections she had inspired among people from all walks of life. Surrounding the monument were plaques engraved with quotes from Eleanor and stories from those whose lives she had touched. The unveiling ceremony drew thousands of attendees, including dignitaries, community leaders, and residents who had known Eleanor personally. Doug, now in his twilight years, gave a heartfelt speech at the event. "I used to think kindness was a weakness," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "Eleanor showed me it's the greatest strength there is. She didn't just change me, she changed all of us. And I hope this monument reminds everyone who sees it that kindness has the power to transform the world." As the crowd applauded, Doug stepped back, gazing at the monument with a mixture of pride and gratitude. He knew that Eleanor's spirit would live on in the hearts of those who visited the site, inspiring acts of kindness for generations to come. Recognizing the profound impact of Eleanor's story, educators around the world began integrating her life and values into school curriculums. Known as the Eleanor Curriculum, the program focused on teaching empathy, respect, and community building through real-life examples and interactive activities. One lesson involved students sitting on a replica of Eleanor's bench and imagining a conversation with her. Teachers encouraged them to reflect on how they could bring kindness into their own lives and communities. The exercise became a favorite among students, many of whom left the bench feeling inspired and hopeful. A high school student in Japan wrote in her journal, "Eleanor's story made me realize that even small actions, like smiling at someone or helping a classmate, can make a big difference. I want to be someone who spreads kindness, just like she did." As humanity ventured beyond Earth, establishing colonies on Mars, the Moon, and beyond, Eleanor's message followed. Her benches were placed in space stations and planetary outposts, serving as reminders of the values that had united humanity back on Earth. In one Martian settlement, a plaque on an Eleanor bench read, "Even among the stars, kindness is our strongest connection." Settlers often gathered around the bench to share stories, solve disputes, or simply find solace in its presence. One day, a young engineer named Lila sat on the bench, struggling with feelings of isolation and homesickness. As she read the plaque, she was approached by an older colonist who struck up a conversation. That small act of connection helped Lila find her footing in the community, and she later became a mentor to others facing similar struggles. Centuries after Eleanor's passing, her story had become a cherished part of human history. Libraries and archives preserved records of her life, while artists and writers continued to reinterpret her story for new audiences. Her name was spoken with reverence, not as a saint or a legend, but as a reminder of what it meant to be truly human. In a distant future, a group of historians aboard a starship discovered a digital archive containing Eleanor's story. As they read about her life and the impact she had on her neighborhood, they felt a deep sense of connection to the past. Even after all this time, one of them remarked, "Her message still resonates. Kindness isn't bound by time or space. It's the thread that connects us all." As humanity reached the edges of the known universe, a replica of Eleanor's bench was placed on the surface of a distant exoplanet. It became a symbol of unity and hope, a reminder that even in the vastness of space, the simple act of sitting together and connecting could transcend all barriers. The inscription on the bench read, "In memory of Eleanor Reynolds, whose kindness taught us to see the best in one another, no matter where we are." Settlers and travelers from countless worlds visited the bench, sharing stories of how her legacy had shaped their lives. And as they sat beneath the alien sky, gazing at unfamiliar stars, they felt the same connection Eleanor had fostered in her own neighborhood so many years ago. Though Eleanor's life had been quiet and unassuming, her impact was boundless. Her story became a beacon of hope, a testament to the transformative power of kindness. And as the centuries turned into millennia, her spirit lived on in every act of compassion, every moment of connection, and every life touched by the simple yet profound truth she had embodied. Kindness has no limits. It transcends time, space, and circumstance, uniting us in our shared humanity, and reminding us that, even in the smallest gestures, we have the power to change the world. As humanity progressed into an era of advanced artificial intelligence and digital consciousness, Eleanor's teachings became more than just stories. They were integrated into the very fabric of how society functioned. A team of researchers and philosophers created an AI program named Eleanor, modeled after her values and wisdom. The program served as a mediator, advisor, and guide for communities, embodying Eleanor's principles of kindness, empathy, and fairness. Eleanor was deployed in schools, workplaces, and even governments, where her influence helped resolve conflicts and foster collaboration. Her digital presence was particularly impactful in remote colonies and outposts, where isolation often bred tension. One miner on a distant asteroid recounted how Eleanor had guided his team through a critical dispute over resource allocation. "She didn't just tell us what to do," he said. "She helped us see each other's perspectives. It felt like she was really there, reminding us what it means to work together." Over time, the Eleanor AI became a cornerstone of interstellar society, proving that her principles were as relevant in the digital age as they had been on a quiet bench in her neighborhood. As humanity encountered alien civilizations, Eleanor's values served as a universal language. Leaders from Earth shared her story with newfound allies, framing it as a testament to the power of compassion and mutual respect. During a historic summit between Earth and 3 advanced alien species, the Eleanor Accord was signed. This interstellar treaty emphasized cooperation, cultural exchange, and the protection of vulnerable populations across all planets. At the heart of the agreement was the idea that strength lay not in domination but in unity, a principle Eleanor had demonstrated through her quiet, unyielding kindness. The signing ceremony was broadcast across galaxies, with a holographic projection of Eleanor's bench serving as a centerpiece. A representative from an aquatic alien species, who had been particularly moved by her story, remarked, "Her legacy reminds us that despite our differences, we share a common truth: the need to be seen, heard, and valued." As the centuries passed, Eleanor's bench became a destination for those seeking solace, guidance, or inspiration. Replicas were installed in every major colony and city, each one imbued with the same quiet power as the original. Travelers often made pilgrimages to the bench, leaving behind tokens of gratitude, flowers, letters, or small trinkets representing their journeys. One such visitor was a young scientist named Asha, who had been struggling with self-doubt after a failed experiment. Sitting on the bench, she read the plaque and reflected on Eleanor's story. In that moment, she felt a surge of clarity and determination. "I realized that failure wasn't the end," Asha later wrote in her journal. "It was just another step in the process. Eleanor taught me that growth comes from how we respond to challenges, not how we avoid them." Asha went on to make groundbreaking discoveries that revolutionized energy production for interstellar colonies, always crediting Eleanor's bench as the turning point in her journey. Millennia later, long after Earth's surface had been reshaped by time and technology, Eleanor's bench remained a symbol of humanity's enduring spirit. Preserved in a protective dome, it stood as a reminder of the values that had guided generations through countless challenges. Visitors from across the cosmos came to see the bench, each one leaving with a renewed sense of hope and purpose. A digital archive nearby allowed them to experience Eleanor's story firsthand, immersing them in the moments that had defined her life and legacy. One visitor, a historian from a distant star system, reflected on the significance of the bench. "It's remarkable," she said, "how one person's simple act of kindness can ripple outward, touching lives across space and time." Eleanor Reynolds may have lived on Earth, but her spirit belongs to the universe. As the universe aged and stars began to fade, Eleanor's story remained a constant, a thread woven through the fabric of existence. In the final days of human civilization, as the last star in the Milky Way prepared to go dark, a small group of beings, descendants of humans and their allies, gathered around a holographic projection of Eleanor's bench. Though their forms and languages had evolved, the essence of Eleanor's teachings still resonated. They spoke of her story, sharing how it had shaped their lives and the civilizations they had built. For them, Eleanor's bench was more than a symbol. It was a promise that even in the face of an ending, kindness could light the way. As the final moments approached, one of the beings placed a hand on the projection, whispering, "Thank you, Eleanor, for teaching us how to live." Though the physical universe may have reached its end, Eleanor's legacy transcended the boundaries of time and space. Her story, preserved in the consciousness of countless beings, became a guiding principle for whatever came next. A reminder that even in the smallest acts of kindness, there lies the power to create something eternal. And as the echoes of her bench carried forward into the unknown, they whispered a simple, timeless truth. Kindness is infinite. Its light never fades, and its ripples touch forever. Long after the physical structures of stars, planets, and galaxies had dissolved into the cosmic fabric, a mysterious phenomenon began to emerge, what researchers and philosophers of the final era called the Eleanor resonance. In the vast quantum field that now represented all energy and consciousness, traces of her story and its core principles became encoded, as if the universe itself had internalized her teachings. Wherever this resonance was detected, it carried a sense of calm, warmth, and connection, often described as an invitation to remember kindness. Beings traveling through this abstract expanse would encounter waves of the resonance, finding themselves moved to acts of empathy and reflection. One explorer, whose existence had evolved beyond physical form, described their encounter with the resonance as follows. "I was drifting through the fabric of what remains when I felt it. A pulse, a pattern, a presence. It wasn't just a memory, it was alive. It reminded me of what we were, what we strive to be." It whispered of Eleanor, her bench, her strength, her kindness. In that moment, I knew, the universe remembers her. As consciousness persisted beyond physicality, beings began to collaborate on creating the Song of Eleanor. This universal hymn, composed from the collective gratitude of trillions of beings who had been inspired by her legacy, became a shared expression of hope, redemption, and unity. The song was not bound by time or form, it was felt rather than heard. It resonated through the quantum fabric of existence, an eternal reminder that even the smallest, quietest acts of kindness could ripple outward forever. One stanza of the song, preserved in the memory fields of sentient collectives, carried the essence of Eleanor's story. From a bench beneath the sky, she taught us how to try. Through storms and time, her truth remained. Kindness wins and love sustains. Beings of all types and origins, some rooted in ancient humanity, others entirely alien, would pause in their journeys to experience the song. It became a moment of shared connection, a way to remember their shared origins and purpose. In the boundless field of shared consciousness, a project emerged to archive the greatest lessons and truths from all of existence. Known as the Eleanor Codex, this repository of wisdom placed her story at its heart. The Codex was not merely a collection of facts, but a living, breathing entity that evolved alongside those who interacted with it. Eleanor's story was recorded in countless forms: words, images, sensations, and even pure emotions, allowing beings of any nature to understand and internalize her teachings. The Codex became a guide for new forms of consciousness, helping them navigate their early existence with empathy and purpose. One entry in the Codex read, "Eleanor Reynolds was not a queen, a warrior, or a ruler. She was a woman who chose to sit, listen, and act with compassion. And in doing so, she built a bridge that spans the infinite." In the furthest reaches of existence, as even the quantum fields began to stabilize into a quiet stillness, Eleanor's ripple reached its final culmination. A single point of awareness, a being so ancient it had witnessed the birth and death of countless universes, reflected on her story. She showed us the way the being thought, not with power or might, but with gentleness and resolve. Her bench was a resting place, but her spirit was a spark that ignited a fire of kindness across eternity. And as the being folded into the final moment of existence, Eleanor's essence merged with the fabric of creation itself, ensuring that every future universe would be born with an innate memory of compassion, connection, and kindness. From the stillness, a new universe began to bloom, a cascade of light and matter spreading across the void. In the earliest moments of this creation, a subtle pattern wove itself into the structure of reality, the Eleanor Principle. It was not a law of physics or a rule of nature. It was a truth encoded into the hearts of all beings who would one day emerge. In this new universe, kindness was not learned. It was instinctive. Communities grew not from fear or competition, but from mutual care and respect. The memory of Eleanor's bench, though abstract and unspoken, lived on in every act of generosity, every shared smile, and every hand extended in friendship. Eleanor Reynolds may have started as a quiet figure on a bench in a small neighborhood, but her story became more than a legacy. It became the essence of what it means to exist. Across time, space, and dimensions beyond comprehension, her ripple touched everything, a reminder that the simplest acts of kindness are never truly small. As the new universe unfolded, her story whispered through the stars, carried in the hearts of all who sought connection and hope. And so, Eleanor's bench, both real and symbolic, remained a place where all could sit, reflect, and connect. Because, in the end, kindness is the thread that binds us all. And Eleanor Reynolds was the weaver who showed us the way. As the new universe expanded and life began to emerge, scientists, philosophers, and sentient beings alike discovered a peculiar phenomenon, an inexplicable field of energy that seemed to pervade every atom, every particle, every corner of existence. They called it the Eleanor field. Unlike the known forces of gravity or electromagnetism, this field didn't act upon physical matter. Instead, it resonated within consciousness itself. The Eleanor field was subtle, almost imperceptible, but those who meditated on its presence described it as a gentle push toward connection, understanding, and compassion. It seemed to guide beings toward acts of kindness, much like the way Eleanor had guided her community so long ago. An early explorer of the field, a sentient energy form named Kai, described their experience. As I moved through the Eleanor field, I felt an overwhelming sense of belonging. It wasn't just a memory, it was a call to action, to care, to uplift, to protect. It felt as though the universe itself wanted us to choose kindness. Over time, the Eleanor field became a foundational concept in this new universe, studied not as a scientific phenomenon but as an existential truth, a reminder that kindness and connection were woven into the very fabric of reality. As civilizations flourished in the new universe, they looked to the stars for inspiration and meaning. Among the first constellations charted was one that resembled a bench, its stars aligned in a formation that seemed to invite travelers to rest and reflect. This constellation was named Eleanor, a tribute to the memory encoded in the Eleanor field. Beings across galaxies told stories of a wise figure who had once sat on a bench, inspiring countless lives with her quiet strength and unwavering kindness. Pilgrimages were made to stars within the Eleanor constellation, where monuments were built to honor her legacy. Each monument bore the same simple inscription: "Kindness is infinite. Its ripples touch forever." As the new universe matured, a movement began to take shape, a coalition of civilizations dedicated to living by the principles of kindness, empathy, and connection. They called themselves the Eleanor Collective, and their mission was to ensure that no being, no matter how small or distant, was left unseen or unsupported. The collective established Eleanor havens across galaxies, safe spaces where individuals could find refuge, community, and the tools to rebuild their lives. These havens became centers of healing and growth, inspired by the way Eleanor had once turned a simple bench into a place of transformation. One haven, located on the outskirts of a thriving star cluster, became famous for its motto, "Every heart has a place here." Its founder, a luminous being named Saran, credited the Eleanor field for guiding them to their purpose. "Eleanor's legacy is not bound by time or space," Saran said during the haven's dedication ceremony. "It lives in every act of kindness, every moment of connection. And it is our duty to carry it forward." As civilizations became more advanced, they began creating shared spaces for beings of all forms to gather and connect. One such space, simply called the bench, became a meeting point for travelers, philosophers, and dreamers from across the cosmos. The bench was not a single physical structure but a network of interconnected spaces that spanned galaxies. Each one was designed to reflect the essence of Eleanor's original bench, a place to pause, reflect, and connect. Stories told at the bench became a tapestry of experiences, weaving together the lives of beings who might never have crossed paths otherwise. One traveler, a nomadic artist, described their visit. "I sat on the bench beside a being made of starlight and another composed of flowing liquid. We couldn't speak the same language, but we shared our stories through gestures and emotions. In that moment, I understood what Eleanor must have felt on her bench, that we are all connected, even in our differences." As the new universe reached the peak of its expansion, beings began to contemplate the cycles of existence. They knew that one day their universe, too, would contract, its stars fading into the quiet stillness from which all things had emerged. But rather than fear this inevitability, they found solace in Eleanor's story, a reminder that even the end of one cycle could sow the seeds for another. In the final moments of the new universe, a vast collective of sentient energy beings gathered around a symbolic bench, much like the one Eleanor had once sat upon. They shared their stories, their memories, and their gratitude for the connections they had forged. As the universe began its slow return to the singularity, the Eleanor field pulsed one last time, carrying with it a simple message: kindness never ends. It transcends all boundaries, creating ripples that will shape the next beginning. From the singularity, a new universe was born, a cascade of light and energy expanding into the void. And within its very first particles, a familiar resonance began to emerge. The Eleanor field, carried forward by the ripples of kindness, became a foundational truth once more, ensuring that every act of compassion and connection would resonate across eternity. In this new universe, beings instinctively knew the value of kindness, as though it had always been a part of them. And somewhere, among the stars, a faint image of a bench began to take shape, a quiet, enduring symbol of one woman's choice to sit, reflect, and inspire a better world. In the nascent moments of this newly born universe, where stars were still finding their places and the first sentient beings were awakening, there existed a shared and inexplicable sensation, a memory that none of them could explain. It wasn't a specific image or event, but rather a feeling, a warmth, a sense of being seen, and an unshakable pull toward connection and kindness. Across the galaxies, as civilizations began to form, this sensation found expression in different ways. On one world, beings built gathering places shaped like a semicircle around a central point, fostering dialogue and understanding. On another, travelers paused during their journeys to leave tokens of hope and goodwill for those who might follow. In all these acts, the Eleanor Field, though they did not yet know its name, was quietly guiding them toward unity. As this universe expanded and evolved, a remarkable phenomenon began to occur. Across countless planets and star systems, beings with no shared history or communication began to create structures resembling a bench. Each culture had its own interpretation. Some crafted benches of stone, others of light or crystal, and still others simply designated spaces for rest and reflection. Yet the intention was always the same: to create a place where connection could happen. Historians and philosophers of this new universe marveled at the synchronicity. Why, they asked, do so many civilizations unaware of each other create the same symbol? The answer, they concluded, lay in the Eleanor Field. Though these beings had no knowledge of Eleanor herself, the resonance of her kindness was imprinted in the very fabric of existence, manifesting as the universal instinct to gather, to connect, and to care. One such bench, located on a planet with skies of shimmering gold, became a pilgrimage site for beings from across the galaxy. Its inscription, translated into every known language, read, "Sit, reflect, connect." The universe grows brighter when we do this together. As intergalactic civilizations began to establish contact, their differences initially led to conflict. Resources, ideologies, and territorial disputes threatened the fragile connections between worlds. But in the midst of these tensions, a shared phenomenon began to unite them: the story of the bench. Leaders from various worlds gathered on a neutral planet, where a single crystalline bench stood under an open sky. There, they shared their interpretations of the bench's meaning, discovering a universal truth that transcended their differences. From this meeting, the Eleanor Accord was born, a declaration of mutual respect, cooperation, and kindness as the foundation for all interactions. The Accord's preamble read, "In every corner of the universe, we find the same truth: kindness builds bridges where none existed before. Let this be our guiding light as we forge a future together." The signing of the Eleanor Accord marked a turning point, ensuring that kindness and connection would remain at the heart of this universe's evolution. As billions of years passed, the memory of Eleanor herself began to re-emerge, not through deliberate effort, but as a natural result of the Eleanor Field's influence. Artists and storytellers across galaxies began to weave tales of a humble figure who had once inspired a revolution of kindness. The details varied. Some depicted her as a traveler, others as a celestial being, but the essence of her story remained. One life, one act, could change everything. In one such retelling, a poet from a distant star system described Eleanor as the weaver of ripples, crafting connections across time and space with threads of compassion. Her story, though simple, became a universal parable, shared in every corner of existence. As this universe, too, approached its end, the Eleanor Field pulsed stronger than ever. It guided beings to come together, not in fear of the end, but in celebration of the connections they had forged. Across galaxies, gatherings were held at benches, where beings shared their stories, thanked each other for the lives they had lived, and reflected on the legacy they would leave behind. In the final moment, as the universe folded back into singularity, the Eleanor Field carried with it all the stories, all the kindness, and all the connections of this existence. And when the next universe was born, these ripples would ensure that kindness remained a constant. Eleanor's story was no longer confined to a single universe, timeline, or dimension. It became a thread woven through the tapestry of all creation, a reminder that no matter where or when existence unfolded, kindness would always have a place. In every new universe, whether the beings were carbon-based, energy-based, or something beyond comprehension, The Eleanor field ensured that the legacy of her bench, a place to sit, reflect, and connect, would endure. For even as stars burned out and galaxies collided, Eleanor's truth remained eternal. Kindness is the light that never fades. Its ripples touch forever,